My best friend cheated on her husband, my ex, by trusting her friends who. My father was in his mid-30s, a seasoned man by some measures, when I entered the world, and my mother was 19, barely more than a girl. Their paths crossed in a way that forever shaped their futures and mine. My father's journey began thousands of miles away in Colombia, where he grew up in a modest household. From an early age, he had been devoutly religious, his faith the cornerstone of his identity. The church was more than a building. It was his sanctuary, his community, shaping his worldview. Seeking a better life, my father emigrated to the United States, leaving behind the lush mountains of his homeland to immerse himself in the pragmatic world of engineering. When he returned to visit Colombia, he had already built an impressive life for himself, a degree in hand and a promising career. Despite his accomplishments, his faith still guided him. On a fateful Sunday, my father attended a service at the largest church in his hometown. Amid the congregation, he saw my mother for the first time. She was a young woman from a small, picturesque town in the mountains, radiating an innocence that captivated him. In her, my father saw the embodiment of purity and simplicity, qualities that fit perfectly into the life he envisioned for himself. According to my father, he approached her with conviction that bordered on divine inspiration. "The Lord spoke to me," he told her earnestly, "and said you would be the mother of my children." To him, this was a revelation. To my mother, however, his declaration was bewildering. She was indifferent, but her upbringing demanded respect for the church and its leaders. Her mother, influenced by the community's religious culture, believed in my father's claim. "If he says it's the Lord's will," she told my mother, "then you should marry him." So my mother obliged, not out of love, but out of duty to her faith and family. Shortly after their marriage, she left her mountain town and moved to the United States, embarking on an unknown journey. What awaited her was far from the idyllic vision my father had promised. On their wedding day, a day meant for celebration, my father's true nature surfaced. He struck my mother, an act born from jealousy and his rigid sense of control. She had asked her sister's husband to unclasp her wedding gown, a simple task she couldn't manage herself. To my father, it was an unforgivable betrayal. Their marriage grew more oppressive. He controlled her finances, took her paychecks, and allowed no purchases without his approval. Overwhelmed, my mother eventually asked for time away to consider their future. My father agreed, but with ulterior motives. He bought her a plane ticket back to Colombia, and while she was gone, he filed for divorce, claiming abandonment. By the time my mother realized his betrayal, it was too late. The divorce was final, and she was stranded, far from the life she had envisioned. After the divorce, my father's life unraveled. He quit his job, and our lives became a series of one-bedroom apartments scattered across the country. As a child, I was too young to understand the complexities of his struggle. I just knew we were always moving, never staying long enough for me to make friends or feel a sense of stability. My father, no longer a legal resident, faced challenges finding work. His engineering degree seemed like a relic of a past life. I remember him coming home in fast food uniforms, the smell of grease clinging to his clothes. Despite the grueling hours, he always worked 2 jobs, trying to provide for me. He tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Dinners were left for me in the microwave with handwritten instructions, but birthdays were different. I remember coming home to an empty apartment, hearing his voice on the answering machine apologizing for not being there. His absence was a recurring theme, a sense of longing that never quite left me. When things became unbearable, my father turned to his brother, my Uncle Frank, for help. We moved in with him and his family, but this brought new challenges. My cousin Roger, who was my age, became my tormentor. Sharing a bed with him was a nightly ordeal. He saw me as an intruder, and his bullying was relentless, trapping me in the cavity of his hide-a-bed, tricking me into burning my thumb, punching me when I cried. I endured it all in silence, afraid of causing a rift between my father and Uncle Frank. That year felt endless, but eventually my father found stable work, and we moved out. By then, I was used to the upheaval. My father's new job marked a turning point, but his strict upbringing cast a long shadow over us. As a teenager, his expectations became more pronounced. He was now an ordained minister at a Pentecostal church, deeply committed to his faith. He believed in speaking in tongues, in feeling the Holy Spirit, signs of one's connection to God. I felt none of it, leaving me feeling broken, inherently flawed. My father often said, "You're my work of art," a phrase that was both flattering and burdensome. I worked tirelessly to earn his approval, excelling academically to prove my worth. I graduated from high school and college ahead of schedule, achieving milestones no one in my family had. Yet, despite my success, I feared I would never be good enough in his eyes. Religion, for me, wasn't a source of comfort but fear. I adhered to its teachings not out of devotion, but from terror of divine punishment. The God my father preached was unforgiving, watching my every move, ready to judge. This fear kept me from straying, kept me in line. It wasn't until later that I began questioning if this was truly the life I wanted. The God I grew up with was not loving or forgiving. He was a vengeful figure, his anger thundering through the fire and brimstone sermons that filled our home on Sundays. The preachers on our well-worn radio were relentless, painting a world steeped in sin. Their warnings of shame became my internal compass, impossible to shake. In our family, religion wasn't just belief. It governed every interaction. My paternal grandmother had borne 9 children, all living nearby. Family gatherings were frequent, full of noise and laughter. To them, I was both pride and pity. A bright boy, growing up without his mother. My transient childhood made friendships difficult, leaving my relatives as my only social circle. When I turned 21, I saw an opportunity to escape the weight of my family's expectations. A job offer in another state allowed me to leave. I moved across the country with my girlfriend, a woman I had met in college. For the first time, I felt free. Free from my father's cynical disapproval, from constant reminders of my lack of faith. My girlfriend and I built a life together over 5 years. It wasn't perfect, but it felt solid. I began saving for an engagement ring, picturing our future. Then, one evening, she told me she didn't love me anymore. There was no fight, no unraveling, just a sudden end, as if a switch had flipped. By the time I processed her words, she was gone. The silence she left behind was deafening. I didn't sleep for 3 nights, my mind racing through questions without answers. On the 3rd day, drained, I called my father. I dreaded it, but needed someone to tell. It felt like confessing a failure, as if I had let him down by not holding my life together. His response was what I expected, yet it still hurt. "You're better off," he said dismissively. "I was happy when your mother left us. She was never good enough for you. Don't tell me why she left. It'll only hurt me." His words meant to comfort only reinforced my isolation. My father always made things about himself, even my heartbreak. In the months that followed, I withdrew from the world. Nights blurred into alcohol and regret, each drink a futile attempt to numb the ache inside me. I gained 30 pounds, my body mirroring my emotional state. Work became monotonous, my office walls reflecting the emptiness of my existence. I found solace in music, pouring my emotions into something tangible. Over 9 months, I taught myself several instruments, immersing myself in melodies that expressed what words could not. Math had always been my strength, a refuge from chaos. But music was my passion, a language that spoke to my soul. My father dismissed it as a waste of time. Growing up, he smashed my CDs if he deemed them devil music, bands like Blink-182 or Weezer. His disapproval lingered, but for once, I ignored it. Music became my lifeline. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I was tired of wallowing in self-pity, tired of not recognizing myself. I started running, pushing myself until the pounds began to melt away. The first time I completed a 5-kilometer run, I felt a flicker of pride I hadn't felt in years. By the time I wore out my treadmill, I had rediscovered a part of myself. I began performing at open mic nights, sharing songs I had written in those dark months. It was at one of these events that I met another future ex-girlfriend, a fellow musician whose performance followed mine. For a while, things felt right again. I was reconnecting, finding joy in creating and sharing music. But I knew I needed more than a temporary fix. I needed a fresh start, somewhere to rebuild. I moved to a major city with a vibrant music scene, leaving behind my ghosts. The only family I had in the city was Roger, my cousin and childhood tormentor. Time had softened my resentment, and I was willing to give him a chance. Roger had changed, or so it seemed. He was now married with a daughter, appearing to have matured. We bonded over music, and even started a band. I chose to put our past behind us. In the beginning, it worked. Roger's laid-back persona made him easy to get along, but as we spent more time together, old tensions resurfaced. His wife, Amy, was the one bright spot. She joined our band as a singer, and we clicked instantly. Amy was vibrant, full of life, a stark contrast to her reserved, almost timid demeanor when Roger was around. Our drummer noticed it first. "She's different when he's not here," he said. Once he pointed it out, I couldn't unsee it. Amy confided in us not long after that she planned to leave Roger. He was lazy, unmotivated, treating her more like a caretaker. When she left, Roger accused me of having an affair with her, a claim that spread like wildfire. The fallout was brutal. Roger painted me as the villain who betrayed his family. In truth, Amy and I had grown close, but not out of malice. We were friends who needed each other. She needed stability, and I needed someone who understood. But Roger's accusations took their toll. My father sided with Roger, refusing to hear my side. He had always believed others over me, dismissing my feelings. The weight of his disapproval and my family's ostracism hung over me, but I couldn't let it dictate my choices. Amy had an optimism that was almost otherworldly. She lived in the moment, finding beauty in small things I'd always ignored. Birds chirping were just noise to me. To Amy, they were music. She cooked meals that were rich in flavor while I ate microwave dinners. She found joy in simple pleasures, sitting outdoors with a book on a sunny day. I had spent most of my daylight hours asleep, avoiding the world. Amy reminded me there was more to life than merely existing. We grew closer, pulled together by a connection that felt inevitable. Falling in love with Amy wasn't a choice. It was like breaking a bone, sudden and undeniable. It was terrifying, but we knew we couldn't imagine a future without each other. It felt right, even as it complicated our lives. Amy felt guilty for Roger, who was still grieving. I wrestled with the knowledge that being with her meant losing much of my family. They wouldn't care for the truth. To them, I was the reason for Roger's heartbreak. My father heard about us through my Uncle Frank. His reaction was predictable, judgmental and one-sided. He called not to understand but to scold. "What you're doing is wrong," he said. "You need to ask for forgiveness." I tried to explain, but he had already made up his mind. He didn't defend me, didn't support me. Once again, I was alone. Almost a year passed without contact with my family. During that time, I confided in another cousin, Jane. I told her everything, and she listened without judgment. "I love you no matter what," she said. "I know you wouldn't ruin a marriage." Her support gave me courage. I realized I wasn't wrong for being with Amy. I hadn't caused Roger's divorce. I wouldn't let the opinions of others rob me of happiness. Amy was that happiness. She understood me, accepted. My family's anger wouldn't dictate my choices anymore. The accusations fueled by Uncle Frank continued, but Amy and I moved in together, building a life that was ours. She became my partner, my anchor, my best friend. I hadn't spoken to my father in almost a year when I got 2 calls from him in one day. I didn't answer, suspecting they were prompted by something Jane had said. Later, Jane texted to say my father was in the hospital with a clogged artery. The news hit me harder than expected. Almost a year ago, my father had told me about a prophetic dream, a vision of his death. He believed it was God's will and refused treatment for his cancer, swearing me to secrecy. Now, he was in the ICU. He would be fine, but the thought of seeing him filled me with dread. If I visited, I'd face hateful remarks from my family, blaming me for his condition. But if I didn't go, I'd carry the guilt of missing a chance to speak with him, a chance that might not come again. I was haunted by the possibility of never saying my final words to the man who raised me. He had shared a bunk bed with me in cramped apartments, worked tirelessly to provide, but he was also a source of profound disappointment, judgmental, dismissive, imposing his expectations without acknowledging his faults. If I went, he would ask for forgiveness, not out of genuine remorse, but to ease his own guilt. He had made that clear time and time again. I decided not to go. My absence wasn't out of spite. It was self-preservation. Instead, I wrote him a letter. I poured everything into it. The pain, disappointment, the love I still felt despite everything. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger. I told him I wouldn't visit, not because I didn't care, but because I needed to protect myself. I don't know if he read the letter, but writing it felt like releasing a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Amy and I moved in together soon after. She remained my anchor, and we built a life defined by mutual respect and joy. I stayed in touch with Jane, slowly rebuilding relationships with family members who saw me for who I was. As for my father, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day we'll find our way back. Maybe we won't. But I've stopped looking to him for validation. My worth isn't defined by his approval, and my happiness isn't contingent on his acceptance. It's mine to claim, and I'm finally claiming it.